heavy snow can be totally inconvenient, even dangerous.
The morning of January 12th began like any other winter day in Petropavlovsk-Kamchatsky. This is the capital city of a very far eastern peninsula in Russia. The people who live there are very tough.
Peninsula residents are facing the heaviest snow in more than 6 decades.
They are used to cold weather because they live in a place full of volcanoes and big oceans. But on this specific morning, something very different started to happen. A massive storm system began to move in from the sea. This was not a normal storm. It was a cyclone that got extra energy from the warm ocean water. It hit the southern part of the peninsula with a strength that scared even the experts. Within just 24 hours, the city was covered in 2 inches of liquid equivalent snow. While that might not sound like a lot, when it turns into frozen flakes and gets blown by the wind, it changes everything. The wind was the real monster here. It reached speeds of over 112 miles per hour. That is the same as a major hurricane. Because the wind was so fast, the snow did not just fall down from the sky, it moved sideways. This is what experts call weaponized snow. It was being driven horizontally, which means it piled up against buildings instead of laying flat on the ground. It filled up courtyards and made snow piles that were impossible to believe. The weather scientists looked at their books and realized this was a record that had stood for 146 years. The last time it was this bad, the world was a very different place. Things get even crazier when you look at how the snow piled up. It was not just a few feet deep in the yard. Because of the way the wind pushed it, the snow began to act like a solid wall. It filled the spaces between buildings until there was no room left. Imagine looking out your window and seeing nothing but white, even if you are on the second floor. This was the start of a tragedy that would soon take lives and trap thousands of people in a frozen prison. The storm was so loud that people could not hear each other talking inside their homes. It felt like the world was ending, and the snow just kept coming and coming without a single break in the clouds. What most people do not realize is that Kamchatka is one of the snowiest places on Earth, but even they were not ready for this. The city systems are built to handle a lot of ice, but this was too much. The big machines that clear the roads could not even get out of their garages. The snow was so thick that the engines could not get enough air. Basically, the city was paralyzed before the sun even went down on the first day. This left everyone on their own to deal with a mountain of white that was growing every single minute. The horizontal wind created a strange effect where one side of a street would be totally empty, but the other side would have a snow pile 30 feet high. This made it very hard for rescue teams to know where to go. They could not use maps because the landmarks were gone. Trees were buried, signs were covered, and even small buildings were simply not there anymore. It was like the entire map had been wiped clean by a giant white eraser. The suspense was building as night fell, and people realized they were stuck. As the first day ended, the records were officially broken. No one in living memory had ever seen the ocean move moisture into the air with this much power. The storm was feeding itself. It was getting bigger and stronger as it sat over the city. Everyone was obsessed with the weather reports, but the news was not good. Another storm was already forming behind the first one. This meant that the people of Kamchatka were about to face a triple threat that would test their will to survive like never before. The weight of the snow started to crush things. Small sheds and carports began to snap like toothpicks under the heavy white blanket. People could hear the wood groaning and cracking through the night. It was a terrifying sound that meant the snow was not just a blanket, it was a heavy weight. This pressure was building up on the roofs of every house in the city, and everyone was wondering if their ceiling would hold until morning. The situation was already bad, but a secret danger was growing inside the deep snow piles. By January 13th, the people woke up to a world they did not recognize. The streets they drove on every day were gone. The yards where children played had turned into deep canyons filled with white powder. But the biggest shock came when people tried to open their front doors. They could not. The ground floor doors were blocked by walls of snow that were so hard they felt like concrete. In many neighborhoods, the snow had reached the second floor of apartment buildings. This is almost 20 feet of snow. Imagine being on the second floor and being able to walk right out of your window onto the snow. This caused a huge problem for the city systems. The pipes that bring water and heat to the homes are under the ground or near the bottom of buildings. When the snow got that deep, it started to freeze the systems. People were trapped in their homes without heat while the temperature outside was way below zero. In some places, the snow was so high it covered the vents for the heaters. This is very dangerous because it can cause bad air to stay inside the house. Emergency crews were getting thousands of calls, but they could not move. The side streets simply stopped existing. They were filled from one side to the other with snow. If you looked down from a high building, you could not see where the road was and where the sidewalk was. It was just one flat plane of white. The only thing sticking out were the very tops of some trucks and buses. These vehicles became monuments to the storm. They were stuck so fast in the ice that they would not be moved for weeks. The snow removal equipment, which is the backbone of any winter city, was fighting a losing battle. They would clear one spot, and the wind would fill it back up in 10 minutes. On Tundraya Street, a whole apartment building entrance was sealed shut for 3 days. The people inside were getting scared. They were running out of bread and milk. They had to use shovels to try and dig from the inside out, but the snow was packed so tight that it was like digging through a wall of bricks. Finally, a giant industrial machine had to come and cut a tunnel to get them out. This rescue was a race against time because the air was getting thin inside the blocked hallway. It was a moment of total relief when the first light broke through the snow wall. Hands down, the most famous videos from this disaster showed people jumping out of their windows. Because the snow was so high, people on the 3rd floor were jumping out into what they thought were soft piles. But the emergency workers were horrified. They knew that under that snow could be a car, a fence, or even a sharp piece of metal. You could not see what was under the surface. Some people got hurt very badly trying to escape this way. They thought they were being smart, but they were actually taking a huge risk with their lives. The schools were closed, but the kids were not happy. They were stuck in small rooms with their parents and no power. The internet was down in many parts of the city because the heavy snow had snapped the wires. Basically, it was like going back in time to 100 years ago. People had to use candles for light and huddle together to stay warm. The psychological toll was starting to show. Being trapped in a small space with the windows covered in snow is a very scary feeling for anyone. Supply chains also ground to a halt. The trucks that bring food from other parts of Russia could not get through the mountain passes. The shelves in the grocery stores were empty within hours. People started to worry about how long they would have to wait for the next delivery. The city felt like an island in a sea of white. There was no way in and no way out. The only way to move around was on foot, and even then, you could only go a few yards before you were exhausted. The snow was acting like a cage, and soon the weight would become a deadly threat to anyone walking below. The true cost of the storm became very sad when the rescue teams found the first victims. In a city where everyone knows how to handle winter, deaths are still a shock. The first person to lose their life was a 60-year-old man. He worked at the City Crisis Management Center. His whole job was helping other people stay safe during emergencies. He had just finished a long shift helping the city and went to his car. He was trying to dig it out so he could go home and rest. But the effort was too much for his heart, and the cold was too strong. He was found later by his own co-workers. It was a very sad moment for the whole city. The second death was even more frightening because it could have happened to anyone. A person was walking near an apartment building when a massive chunk of ice fell from the roof. This was not just a small icicle. Because of the crazy amount of snow, the ice on the roofs had grown into blocks that weighed thousands of pounds. When they break off, they do not just fall straight down. They hit the side of the building and bounce out. Experts call this a lethal zone. This zone can reach up to 23 feet away from the building. The resident never saw it coming. The ice was so heavy it was like being hit by a falling car. This led the city leaders to declare a state of emergency on January 16th. This was a very big deal. It gave the military the power to come in and help. It also meant that the city could force people to leave dangerous areas. This was not just about paperwork, it was about survival. The military brought in huge tanks and trucks that could move through anything. They started a mission to clear the paths to hospitals and fire stations. But even the army struggled. The snow was so deep that even the big tanks were getting stuck in some of the drifts. The danger from above was not the only thing to worry about. Under the snow, there was a hidden world of tunnels. Children loved to dig in the snow, and with 20 feet of it, they saw a chance to make the best snow forts ever. But the parents were trapped and could not watch them. The emergency services had to put out a very urgent warning. If a snow tunnel collapses, the snow is so heavy that a person cannot breathe or move. It only takes a few seconds for a fun game to turn into a tragedy. There were several close calls where neighbors had to dig out kids who were buried alive in their own tunnels. Transportation was totally broken. The buses that people used to get to work every day stopped running. The narrowed streets were too small for the big buses to turn around. In some cases, the police had to use their four-wheel drive trucks to take doctors and nurses to the hospital. But even the police cars were sliding off the roads. Every time a car got stuck, it blocked the way for the snow plows. This made a huge traffic jam of abandoned cars that were slowly disappearing under the falling white powder. The economic impact was huge. Imagine owning a restaurant or a shop and having 0 customers for a week. Revenue dropped by 80% for most businesses. Hotels were empty because no one could fly into the airport. The airport had to close because they could not keep the runway clear. Even if they plowed it, the wind would fill it back up before a plane could land. The region's economy, which is already tough because it is so remote, was taking a hit that would take months to fix. As the days went on, the snow started to change. It became packed and icy. This made it even harder to move. Every shovelful felt like it weighed 50 pounds. People were getting exhausted just trying to clear a path to their mailboxes. The sense of community was strong, but the physical work was breaking people's spirits. Everyone was looking at the sky, waiting for the sun to come out, but the clouds were thick and gray. The city was fighting to stay alive, but a massive threat was looming on the mountain peaks above them. By the time the state of emergency was in full swing, the weather data started to come in. The scientists were shocked by what they saw. In just 2 days, the city got more than half of the snow it usually gets in a whole month. The Sea of Okhotsk had acted like a giant pump, throwing moisture into the air and turning it into snow. But the bad news was that the first storm was just the beginning. A second cyclone hit on January 14th with winds of 85 miles per hour. Then a third and a fourth storm followed right after. It was a conveyor belt of disasters. Each new storm did not just bring new snow, it moved the old snow around. A path that someone spent 5 hours digging would be filled back up in an hour. This made the cleanup effort feel impossible. The military and civilian crews were working 24 hours a day, but they could not keep up. They brought in heavy equipment from other regions by ship, but even those machines struggled. The city was a war zone, and the enemy was the weather. The biggest worry now was avalanches. Because Petropavlovsk-Kamchatsky is a hilly city near big mountains, all that snow was sitting on steep slopes. The weight was at a critical level. Anything could start a slide. A loud noise or a small change in temperature could send thousands of tons of snow crashing down on houses. High avalanche warnings were put out for 5 different districts. This meant that rescue teams had to be very careful. If they used a big loud machine to clear a road, they might trigger a slide that would bury them and the houses nearby. Volunteer groups became the heroes of the week. Hundreds of people who could get out of their houses started helping their neighbors. They made long human chains to pass buckets of snow out of blocked doorways. This was the only way to move the snow in places where machines could not fit. It was a beautiful sight to see everyone working together, but it was also very dangerous. People were getting frostbite and getting very tired. The city had to set up rules for volunteers so they would not get hurt while trying to help. The state of emergency changed how everyone lived. There were curfews at night to keep people off the dangerous streets. Building inspectors were out all day and night checking roofs. They were looking for cracks in the walls because the snow was so heavy it was pushing the buildings down. Some older buildings had to be evacuated because they were about to collapse. Imagine being told you have to leave your home and walk out into a blizzard because your roof might fall in. It was a nightmare for the elderly and families with small babies. The loss of power made things even worse. Without electricity, the pumps that move water stopped working. People had to melt snow on their wood stoves just to have something to drink. But you have to be careful when you melt snow because it takes a lot of snow to make just a little bit of water. And you have to make sure the snow is clean. Basically, the basic things we take for granted every day were gone. No lights, no running water, and no way to call for help if you got sick. Supply drops started to happen by helicopter when the wind died down for a few minutes. They would drop boxes of food and medicine into the snow piles near the apartment buildings. people would have to climb out of their second-story windows to go get the boxes. It looked like a scene from a movie about the end of the world. But this was real life in 2024 for the people of Kamchatka. They were living through history, but it was a history they wanted to forget. The immediate danger of the storm was fading, but a much bigger problem was about to melt into view. As the cleanup continued through January 16th, the people of Kamchatka started to look at their city with new eyes. This was not just a bad winter. This was a total change in how they had to think about survival. The snow will eventually melt, and that brings a new danger: flooding. When you have 20 feet of snow melting all at once, the water has nowhere to go. The ground is frozen, so the water stays on top. This means that the basements that were just cleared of snow might soon be filled with water. The cleanup is one of the biggest missions in the history of the region. Even with the army and the federal government helping, it will take months to get things back to normal. The money needed to fix the roads, the buildings, and the power lines is in the millions. But the hidden cost is the stress on the people. Many spent days in total darkness, wondering if they would ever get out. That kind of fear does not go away just because the sun comes out. The big question on everyone's mind right now is why this huge storm happened. Scientists who study the weather say that the oceans are getting warmer, and this is making storms much stronger than they used to be. Specifically, the Sea of Okhotsk near Russia is not as cold as it was in the past. When water is warmer, it turns into vapor and puts much more moisture into the air. Think of it like a giant pot of water boiling on a stove. The more heat you add, the more steam fills the room. When this extra moisture hits the cold air, it turns into record-breaking snow. This means these monster cyclones are not just a one-time thing. They could easily happen again because the ocean is still holding all that extra heat. If a city like Petropavlovsk-Kamchatsky can be stopped by snow, we should all be a little worried. This is a place that is known for being the best in the world at handling winter. The people there are experts at clearing roads and keeping things moving when it freezes. But this storm was so big that even the experts could not keep up. If a city that lives and breathes snow can be brought to its knees, what does that mean for other places? Most cities in the world do not have the right plows or the right training for this. If a storm like this hit a city that isn't used to it, that city would not last a single day. Everything would stop, from the power to the food deliveries, and people would be stuck exactly where they are. We really have to stop and wonder if our buildings and our roads are actually ready for this new kind of wild weather. In Kamchatka, the local leaders are already talking about changing the laws for how they build houses. They realize that the old ways of building are just not enough anymore. They are looking into making roofs much stronger so they do not collapse under the weight of several tons of snow. They are also talking about a very smart change: making doors that open inward. Usually, front doors open out toward the street. But if 10 feet of snow piles up against your house, you are trapped inside because you cannot push the door open. If the door opens inward, you can at least pull it open and start digging your way out. Beyond just the houses, the city needs bigger machines and better ways to store food right in the neighborhoods. In the past, people would drive to big stores to get what they needed. But when the roads are buried under a mountain of white, nobody can drive anywhere. This means every small neighborhood needs its own supply of food and water that can last for a long time. The old way of doing things is hands down not enough anymore. We are entering a time where the weather is more extreme than it has ever been in 146 years of keeping records. We have to change how we live because the environment around us is changing fast. The scary thing is that we are missing some very important details about how to live with this much snow. Usually, when a blizzard hits, we just stay inside and wait for it to stop. But what happens if the snow does not stop for a whole week? What if the snow reaches the windows on the third floor next time? These are the frightening questions that the residents are asking themselves as they try to find their cars under the drifts. These people are very tough, and they will rebuild their city, but they are doing it with a new sense of worry. They know that the ocean is right there, and it is full of energy that could send the next big storm their way at any moment. This is not just a problem for Russia, it is a problem for the whole world. Weather patterns are shifting all over the globe. In some places, it is way too much snow, while in other places, it is way too much heat and fire. Every single year, we see new records being broken. The story of what happened in Kamchatka is like a warning bell for all of us. It tells us that we need to be more prepared and take the changes in our climate very seriously. Survival in the future might depend on how well we learn the lessons from this frozen peninsula. We cannot just hope things go back to normal, because normal is gone. As the sun finally broke through the clouds for the first time in a week, the city looked like a picture on a postcard, but it was a broken picture. The white snow was sparkling in the light, but under that beauty were stories of lost homes and the incredibly hard work of thousands of people. The recovery will take a very long time, and the memories of being buried alive in their homes will stay with these families forever. For now, the people of Kamchatka take a deep breath, pick up their heavy shovels, and keep moving forward. They do not have another choice. They have to clear the path for tomorrow, even if they know another storm might be coming. Are we really prepared for a winter that can bury our entire lives in just 48 hours? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. Like and subscribe for more.